Hello, everyone. Welcome all members and guests to our second DIA webinar of the 2021-2022 season. My name is Maria Jelenides, and I am this year's president of the DIA. Because of the global pandemic, we have opted to continue to hold our meetings as webinars. The two key mandates of the Digital Imaging Association are to provide education and networking opportunities for our members. At this time, we have to forego networking for everyone's safety, but I do hope you find the educational aspect worthwhile, and we look forward to your feedback. Our membership is comprised of pre-press, printers, packaging converters, designers, advertisers, print buyers, equipment, and consumable manufacturers and vendors. If you are with us as a guest, please consider joining the Digital Imaging Association. Today's session is an example of the high caliber meetings we run. If you would like more information on membership, please contact either myself or Mark McLeod at 416-254-4941 or marg@digitalimagingassociation.com. Like most trade associations today, financial stability does not come from the membership revenues alone. And so we turn to the vendor suppliers to support our goals as an association. We are honored to receive the support and recognition of the DIA's contribution to the growth and development of the graphic imaging sciences industry from the following companies. Our platinum sponsors: Canon, HP, Konica Minolta, Spicers, Swiss Q Print. Our gold sponsors: Adobe, Fujifilm, Graphics Canada, Kodak, Heidelberg. Our silver sponsor, Sydney Stone. Please consider these companies and their demonstrated support of the industry when making your purchasing decisions. Technology for this webinar has been generously provided by HP. Handling staffing chaos, what are the options? It's no secret the pandemic has resulted in a significant lack of available labor through layoffs, resignation, and retirement. Job openings are sky high. Many positions are going unfilled for months. Running a company requires people and parts. People are quitting and parts are missing. What are the options to combat this situation and keep your business thriving? Automation is a big one. Retaining current staff by offering better perks is another choice. And paying forward to draw new, fresh faces into the industry must become part of the print culture. And there's government funding available. The next two slides shows options for integration of autonomous mobile or static robot. Fujifilm's Inca Onset with a robotic arm, and Konica Minolta's double robot, which is mobile. This slide shows Friesen's cobot working on a line, taking cartons and placing them on pallets. The DIA has put together a panel of experts to give us insight into automation options, such as affordable robotics, retaining staffing, and government funding. At this time, I'd like to introduce our moderator for today, Stephen Longmire. Stephen is the National Sales Manager at Sydney Stone, a silver level DIA sponsor. Stephen's role include researching new product lines and manufacturers to distribute, setting pricing structures, managing the partner program, and conceiving and implementing marketing initiatives to support sales efforts. Prior to joining Sydney Stone, Stephen was the associate publisher of Print Action for 13 and a half years and was responsible for sales, special projects, organizing and hosting the Canadian Printing Awards, as well as Print Forum. Stephen has supported the Canadian Print Scholarship Fund for many years and has also served on the DIA board for 6 years, including the last 2 years as president. Stephen, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you very much, Maria. Appreciate the introduction. At this point in time, I'd like to introduce our panelists for today. Our first panelist is Byron Leptke, who is Senior Vice President of Books with Friesens. Byron's journey with Friesens started when he was young, and his dad would take him to work with him. He would even bring work home, so on evenings and weekends, he was busy coding and burning plates, laying out history book pictures, tinning calendars, or working on masking sheets. His bedroom became his own little office, complete with a light table. Byron's full-time career started over 40 years ago as a press feeder, and he worked his way up to press bindery manager, then production manager, and then VP Operations for Book, Web, and Yearbook divisions with Friesens. Byron is now Senior Vice President of Books. Friesens has installed cobots to work with their bindery lines and has changed the company from being privately held to employee-owned with regular beneficiary payments to all of its 600 employees/owners. Our next panelist is Todd Cobra, President of Cobra Solutions. Cobra is a 150-year-old family-owned and operated business with a team of 185 and with 2 facilities in Kitchener, Ontario, and the second one in Barrie, Ontario. Cobra's offering includes offset printing, digital printing, wide format, warehousing, and fulfillment and marketing services. And Todd has quite literally grown up in the business. He started working in the bindery on the folders at the age of 12, and then with the help of the talented staff at Cobra, started to learn all of the other finishing equipment. By the age of 16, Todd was working in the press room, feeding the 40-inch and learning the craft of printing. And after high school, Todd went to Ryerson University to earn his Bachelor of Technology. After completing his degree in 2005, Todd came back to work at Cobra full-time in a sales/customer relationship position. Todd is now the president at Cobra and works with their executive team to ensure they are focused on the future so they can remain successful for decades to come. Our next panelist is Mark Radd, who is president and CEO of Significance Automation. Significance is a software integration company specializing in delivering next-generation automation to the printing and packaging industries. Mark is an industry veteran with an outstanding record of accomplishments in team management, business development, and sales. During his tenure at HP and ESCO, he is recognized for his performance in the top 1% of sale achievers. At this point in time, before I turn it over to Mark, I'd like to encourage our attendees of this session to submit questions through the Q&A tab. If you'd like it posed to a specific panelist, please indicate the panelist's name in the question. And if not, I will pose the question to the panel as a whole. Thank you, Mark, and please take it away.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. It's a pleasure to address everyone here today. The topic of the Great Resignation has become quite contemporary, actually. And when Mark and the DIA board came to me a few weeks ago, they had tried to internalize and find a solution around the topic. So they had asked me then to address the topic for you here today, and we have arrived at a critical fork in the road. So undeniably, solving labor shortages can only be accomplished through automation and robotics. And if we think about it, automation is available all around us today, from our cars to our homes. It serves as a time recovery for all to enjoy, and really starts at a younger generation. They tend to automate many things around them, such as their phones or their gaming experiences. And I'm going to start with a thought that I'd like to extend to the group here. So imagine if these younger folks came to work and we really didn't give them the ability to automate what they were doing here today. Next slide, please. So equally at work, automation and robotics helps recover time. IBM defines automation as a term for technology applications where humans and their input is minimized. So therefore, automation in the form of minimizing touch points, creating immediate capacity opportunities with background processes taking over the steps, creating consistencies with fewer errors are common adoptions. For example, input the data once, and the automation has a trigger all the way to the printing and finishing queues in our businesses. At the end of today's meeting, I'm hoping that your takeaway will highlight that automation and robotics are accessible, very helpful, and more affordable than ever before. Next slide. I'm going to start with some incredible statistics here. In August this year, 4.3 million people quit their jobs in the US. I'll repeat that, 4.3 million people quit their jobs. And what's even more incredible is that 20 million people have not gone back to work since April this year. Now, thank goodness, those numbers are US numbers. But if you think about those numbers for a second, those are the numbers that are playing havoc on supply chain chaos, inflation rates going up, etc. Now, our Canadian numbers are a little less drastic. When we think about them and they're supplied through Stats Canada, unemployment is suggested to be at 7.6%. from 13.7% the year before. Next slide. So why are people leaving their jobs? For a number of reasons, actually. We look at unemployment benefits, the collection of CERB, for example. There's inadequate pay, there's caregiving, whether people have stayed home to take care of their elderly or even their younger. There's relocation, there's the fear of in-person contact, and there's a new term called work-life balance. I presume that's where people stay home and find themselves figuring out whether it's worth working or not, sort of thing. So next slide. Some things to think about. What if I told you that most printing and packaging companies already have elements in their place today that helps them automate more? We collect so much data in our day-to-day, and from there, we trigger levels of automation from this reservoir of relevant data. The next thing I'd like to invite you to think about is, what if the investment was much more affordable than you think it is? You have also support grants out there that are furnished through our governments to help you modernize your business. And for those who want a list of those grants that are available, the DIA can supply those grants as a follow-up to this meeting. Thank you. Next slide. My VP of Operations coined this recently. She says, we need to recognize that automation doesn't supersede talent. With automation, talent is freed up to succeed. So let me repeat that one more time so it's a great layup for the next slide. Automation doesn't supersede talent. With automation, talent is freed up to succeed. So to that, people working with automation augment efficiencies in their business. Next slide, by the way. So people working with automation obviously augment efficiencies immediately. We have to look at retention of staff, which is really, really important, plus the need to attract people who are interested in technology and who can boast about their employers being sophisticated and modern. As a first step, we always recommend taking stock of what's current in the business, outline new processes, and by doing so, look for standard operating procedures for many to follow and become a default. And by that virtue, automation will win. Next slide. It's estimated that in 2020, the worldwide stock of operational industrial robots hit 3,053,000 units versus half that amount back in 2016. This represents an average growth rate of about 14%. In Canada, there are 136 robots per 10,000 employees. That's well above the average globally. It's 69 robots per 10,000 employees. So those numbers in Canada are estimated to be about 26,000 robots. Now, what's interesting is that Stats Can put together another thought for us. And they've said that in 2020, firms who have employed robots have also hired human workers, contrary to what many would believe to be instinctively different. Having the robots on site would be obviously a detriment to the need to hire. But in fact, a lot of the companies hired more, and to the tune of 15% more workers. So along with the increased economic activity that the robots bring to businesses, a shift in the workforce and workers spending less time performing routine, mundane tasks in favor of more cognitive tasks has also become the norm. Next slide. So to be effective with our conversation here today, we've got to look at the year of resignation as a year of fantastic transformational opportunity. Paul, we'll go back one slide, please. Thanks. The numbers illustrated here suggest that when monetizing the purchase of an entry-level autonomous mobile robot, otherwise known as an AMR, and an autonomous forklift robot, that the numbers come in at a fraction of the traditional per se. So especially when we consider that multi-shift review of a robot, its uptime, self-charging capabilities, that robots don't get sick, nor do they get weeks off for vacation. That's also quite a big consideration here when people are looking at how to monetize the opportunity. Next slide. So preceding me here today, you'll hear from a couple of companies who have innovated and gone the way of a transformational journey. In fact, their journey started probably 2 decades ago. They've embraced robotics and automation to better their manufacturing process. They've had their own reasons for being early adopters, but what we really need to do is applaud them. They've shown us that it is possible. Moreover, they've had their own epiphanies regarding treasured cultures and their key staff, and have since implemented measures to retain and grow their teams. These are areas I would invite you to dialogue with them about. Next slide. So before I pass the mic over to our esteemed guests, I'd just like to leave you with this infographic here on the left side of the screen. It shows that we've come a long way since the early 1990s. And on the right side, we're showing try, test, and intrude innovation that has brought us here today. We can embrace this next phase easily to conquer the great resignation. Now, today, the venue is not about how and why we got here. It's more about the fact that the time has come to embrace the change and get really inspired by where we need to be next. Next slide. And to that, I want to thank everybody for lending me your time. Stephen?
Thanks, Mark. That was very, very informative. At this point in time, I'd like to ask Byron and Todd to define, when you think of automation within your respective companies, how do you define it? Is it software-based? Is it physical automation? I know there have been examples of both of your companies that have featured physical automation as well, but kind of how do you define it? And what are the steps you use to approach it? Start with Byron, perhaps?
Sure. So, I'd say we define it much like it was defined in the previous presentation. It really is trying to eliminate some human intervention into a physical task. But it really is much broader than that, in that it certainly begins with the front end, the ERP systems, but it goes right back to the equipment. And so when we think about automation, I don't think there's any part of our business that we don't think can be touched by automation. And I would say, it feels like we're still at the very beginning of our journey, and we see lots of opportunity for us moving forward. But I would say it's not a specific portion of our business. It is the entire business that can benefit from it.
Yeah, I think my definition would be, kind of simply put, leveraging technology to help us be more efficient in anything that we do. And there's many, many different ways we can do that, but that's kind of the broad statement that I would think.
Oh, perfect. I know as kind of a point that Mark made earlier too, even web to print sort of automation and removing touch points from that way for receiving art files and proofing and things like that have come a long way. I'm sure both Todd and Byron have seen elements of your company where maybe you targeted a certain automation, but then you kind of thought of other things downstream or upstream that you're looking at as well. Could you kind of provide maybe an example of one of those? Todd, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, once you invest in automation and kind of open that Pandora's box, so to speak, it never really ends. I mean, you're always tweaking it, enhancing it. As an example, we have just invested in Tharstern, a new MIS system. Throughout the pandemic, we implemented Tharstern, and we have this vision of grander vision way on out, but right now it's in its infancy. We almost just replaced our old MIS, but we're phasing in many different automation steps to allow us to get work from initial inquiry to shop floor a whole lot quicker.
Fantastic. Byron, yourself?
Yeah, I think that when we think about some of what we've done, it would be things along our MIS system, which we are also looking at replacing. And I think it's also that if there's one thing that we're most afraid of, if we're nervous about automation, we're really nervous about our ERP system, recognizing how it just has such a wide impact on our business. And we've had a pretty stable system, but being in the book business, there's not a lot of options available that are tailored specifically for the book business. And so it's a little bit bigger lift for us. But on the front end, that's very true. On the back end, certainly when we look at steps that used to be, we did a process and then we stopped, and then we did a process and then we stopped, and we start joining them, and then really understanding, where does it make sense to connect and where does it make sense to stay disconnected. And a simple example for us would be, we used to collate signatures of books, and then we stacked it on a pile, and we'd collate, and then we'd sew the book later on. And now these two pieces of equipment are integrated. And certainly that's been around for a while, but that'd be an example of what's happened in the back.
Interesting. Mark, maybe from the vendor side, you want to kind of speak to that as well. I'm sure you've had customers that have started kind of with a very targeted automation focus, and then it's just sort of sprawled out as Todd sort of mentioned, Pandora's box was open and it just, they were like a kid in a candy store, maybe with all the different possibilities.
Well, that's why we have a business here. Yes, we find as we get engaged with a number of customer projects that once we're done with, call it a first phase or a second phase, that we're constantly doing refinements. And those refinements really end up being like the renovation to a floor at a time in a renovation and home type of thing. So yeah, there is a lot of refinements that get going with projects, but more importantly, we've recognized that that's the necessity with digital, because we're always doing, as Byron suggested, the connectivity between different islands of automation, or the connectivity between software solutions that don't speak today, but will speak tomorrow.
That's perfect. I guess actually, how do you, I'll stay with Mark on this one.
Yeah.
I liked how you kind of had the automation for the forklift as well as the mobile carrying device. How do you determine the true cost of automating those processes? What steps kind of go into that?
Yeah, there's a number of steps that go into evaluating if robotics is right for the business, and I'll leave it to my esteemed colleagues here on the phone to explain that a little bit further. But where we start is with an assessment, and usually it's a self-assessment. What does the shop floor look like? What are we trying to connect? Where is the robot trying to go? What is it trying to bring, et cetera, et cetera. And that gives you the evaluation, or the astute evaluation of whether we're looking at a certain size or a certain payload that makes sense for the robot that's going into the environment. Plus, we got to look at what are the customized applications that those autonomous vehicles are doing. And when we evaluated as a corporation where we want to bring robotics to the business, we evaluated what's the customized applications look like. We want them all to move, but if the robot is tasked with a certain application or a certain level of automation, what is it that it's going to be doing on top of its moving capabilities? Plus, we look at floor plans. Those are really, really important. And today, prior to anything else, we look at safety, because we have to look at safety with moving vehicles in the business.
Perfect. I'd like to engage Byron and Todd as well too. How have you sort of determined a value set for robotics or automation? Like, I know both of you are looking at MIS systems. Are you looking sort of the number of touch points, the number of people, salaries in those departments that then can be refocused, or how have you gone to kind of formulate that value proposition internally?
I'll go first if you want, Byron. So, I mean, the general ROI is, generally speaking, a pretty easy calculation when you're speaking through robotics. The only thing I would add to that, probably more important or equally as important, is the risk that if we don't do it. And I think we're all seeing this right now in terms of our workforce and our ability to onboard people into let's say, onto aged equipment. It's very, very challenging. So from my perspective, from our perspective here, we invest heavily in automation and new technology as much as a retention tool as it is an ROI calculation, and just to help secure us for the future from a labor force.
Yeah, I concur with that. I think if you go back many years, Friesen's had we showed a Cobra here, which is a collaborative robot, but we had a bigger, much larger robot about 20 years ago that was already putting books, cartons onto skids, but very large, very industrial, and it required caging and wasn't nearly as user-friendly. But part of it for us back then was really a labor challenge. In southern Manitoba, where we're located, labor availability has been a challenge for the last 2 decades or more, and so it's a real battle to find enough people. And so we're certainly looking for those efficiency opportunities, but beyond that, we're looking for ways that we can save on labor. And it hasn't been a difficult, and maybe I'm heading down a different path now, but it hasn't been difficult integrating them into our facilities or our buildings, because all of these people are getting opportunities elsewhere in the building. Nobody is concerned that they're going to lose their job, but the opportunity is going to be they're going to get a better job. And so it's really not viewed as negatively as it might be in some areas, because it really is opening up opportunities for people as opposed to taking it away from them.
I think that's a great point that you make, Byron, because so many people traditionally would think automation, losing workforce, losing jobs. And Todd referenced as well as Mark earlier too. It's great. It's about repurposing your workforce or putting them in more value bringing or value enhanced positions that can be more beneficial for the company themselves in terms of mental aptitude and retention of staff. So I think that's a great point that you've all kind of tied in there. I guess I'd like to talk a little bit about post-press automation. Byron, you sort of mentioned it with the loading of that very industrial caged thing in previously, but how many jobs or kind of when you've done, I know it's all different in terms of different steps in a finishing process, how complicated or simple it may be, but is there certain steps within the finishing lines that are easier to automate than others perhaps, or?
Well, I think one of our learnings on this journey has been, in order for us to really take some larger steps into automation, particularly on the production floor, it's the need to standardize. The more we standardize, the better opportunity we have to automate. If we don't standardize, it's not that it can't be done, it just gets a whole lot more complicated. So, we're looking at things, for example, as simple as how we stack book blocks, how we stack signatures coming off a folder in a way that we've never looked at it before because of how we've handled it manually in the past. And so, I think those kinds of things are the things that, we're looking at in a new light right now, because we think that is really where we're going to have some opportunities. And we certainly are focused on the more physical portion of our business, things that are physically a little bit more difficult for our staff. And also, often they are linked to positions that pay a little bit less. And so we're trying to eliminate, many of the lower paid positions and replace them with higher paid positions. And that also then helps with retention. So I think it becomes a win-win for the employee and also for the business.
I would echo what Byron said in terms of technology doesn't necessarily eliminate the need for good process. It almost amplifies it a little bit, and through standardization, like Byron said. To answer your question about what's from a post-press perspective, what's the kind of low-hanging fruit from an automation perspective, we've done that two different ways. One was autonomous vehicles, autonomous material handling, and have found value in that. But probably another one that we find more value in is in the make-readies and the setups of getting the information, actual job information to equipment, and really reducing the make-ready times, forcing machines to set themselves up rather than humans doing it kind of the old school way. And those would be the two ways that we have automated in post-press.
Correct. I know traditionally, as companies, larger commercial printers, they would automate sort of usually the production, make-readies or MIS, things like that. But sort of the finishing line would almost be the last step, and usually it was very labor intensive. So it's great that you're both you're looking at the entire process throughout. For the next one, I kind of like to reach out to Mark here and say, for companies that are on and attending today, how do they get started with automation and possible robotics? Like how should they look? Should they almost have like an internal audit in terms of processes before they reach out to you, or do you assist sort of with that process along the way?
Yeah, we do assist a little bit with that process. It's more of a self-assessment of their own business sort of thing. They'll take stock, as I said in my presentation, of where they are today and where they need to be. Can they drop their own future state? If they can't, we assist through our processes to sort of map that out and create a plan, and that creates a statement of work, and we abide by that sort of thing. I think it's really, really important that businesses take stock of what they have in terms of their people resources, their processes currently. How are they connecting islands of automation today? Because people are making a lot more digital investments in their businesses than ever before. And then, as we talked about earlier, the MIS system, that becomes the heartbeat of every organization sort of thing. And so how are we connecting the dots there? And when we look at a project, we look at it quite seriously from a holistic standpoint, of course. And the holistic aspects include, what is it that you currently own? And Mr. Customer, tell me a little bit about your vision, type of thing.
Correct. I guess I'd like to reach out to Todd and Byron on this sort of, well, what sort of the greatest benefits you've experienced within your respective companies with the automation steps? Sort of, would it be quantitative in terms of obviously revenue saved or costs realized, but also probably could be more intrinsical of staffing, well-being, like you've sort of alluded to. They're proud to work for this company that's investing in automation and things like that. What were sort of the greatest ones you both received, and maybe not one that you expected when you initially did it?
You know, I think that, and maybe it's because it's most recent. Certainly the cobots that we've purchased 4 of them. A 5th one will be here shortly. You know, has saved, you know, a lot of labor, certainly at the back end of our binding lines. You know, this is our ROI on it, I think, just gets a little bit stronger because we run almost all of our facilities at 624. So, you know, we're never multiplying an ROI by 1 on one shift. We're always doing it by 4. And so that opportunity really helps us a long way when we're looking to justify any kind of investment. But I think the other thing that happens that we I think work on and is a challenge is, you know, almost acquiring equipment is maybe the easiest part because there's equipment out there to buy. There's certainly vendors that will sell you equipment, but you know, we could sometimes internally we call it innovation in the gap, and that is really trying to understand, you know, the processes that we don't understand as well as we think we do, and then partner with, you know, our suppliers, not in a one-dimensional way where they're supplying equipment, but they're really becoming, you know, an integral part of our business to help us understand our business, to help us understand their equipment better, and then typically this means that we're on a journey together. We're not, you know, giving you a PO and we'll see you after the training is done. You know, we're into long-term partnerships.
Yeah, I would say one of the benefits that came from automation that we didn't necessarily anticipate was the cultural impact to our business. I would say our teams are always used to how it was. And once we started making fundamental changes to our workflow or how we batch jobs or gang jobs and start to make their life easy and different, it was exciting for them. And at the end of the day, I feel like inherently, if we feel productive as humans, we're going to enjoy that more. And we see significant culture upside to providing efficiencies to our team. And I think we can, as maybe executives or owners in businesses, we can quite often sit here at our desk with a notepad and a calculator and see how does it impact the bottom line. But I think that it's really important to understand how it impacts the team on the shop floor as well. And we've seen an upside there.
That's fantastic. Byron, you sort of mentioned vendors and working collaboratively. I know both of you have fantastic relationships with your respective vendors. Have you noticed that the vendors, in addition to the automation that obviously they have in their own equipment, they're now having to learn how to work with automation that you would have in your respective businesses as well? Have you found that they have been open to that and it's been they've been collaborative? Because I know in some cases it's not just an out of the box automated solution. They have to then work with what you have in-house, which is outside of their normal scope of things. I'll start with you, Todd, since so.
Yeah, I mean, we lean on our vendors heavily, and they have been open to it. But I think equally as important is, and we've witnessed it over the last 2 years, specifically through the pandemic, we've witnessed a huge upside into connecting with our peers and seeing how they're doing it. And I feel like vendors operate in their own ecosystem, but that's not always realistic to our businesses. We've got many different types of devices that don't often talk to one another and require some automation between them. And it's really nice to have a network within the industry to reach out to and say, hey, how are you doing this? Or I understand you have that piece of equipment. I'm not leveraging it to the extent that I feel we should be. Are you? And you can kind of get a quick reality check that are your expectations real or not too?
Yeah, I can point out a couple of manufacturers that we work with that actually supply us with, not individual knowledge from companies, but corporate knowledge for the equipment. And it allows us to benchmark ourselves not against ourselves, because we're always, of course, trying to prove against what we do and what we know, but how are we doing against the shop down the street, the one in another country? And I think for us, that's also been very helpful. And I think our vendors are looking for ways to understand our business better, because I think even as we're developing, and understanding our processes as we do, the more we can help them understand our business, the better opportunity they will have to be able to help us as well.
Right. I'd like to ask Mark, because you're sort of on the other side of this, you're working sort of as a bridge between Todd and Byron and the vendors as well for the equipment manufacturers that they're purchasing from. You're trying to make everything work. How are you finding that experience?
Well, this is a topic that I'm very passionate about. It really is, for an integrator, it is about, one, us being as neutral as possible and looking at what is best in class software, for example, or best in class robotics for the application. And then part two, as Byron has suggested, it's really a journey of how long are we staying with that vendor, and can we trust them enough to be engaged for numerous years, sort of thing. At my level, I can tell you that at least 85% of my contracts are multi-year, multi-phased, and we are bringing in renovations to the business or transformations to the business on every phase. And we do work, and we do have a number of buy and sell relationships with a number of software vendors out there. They are evolving their knowledge about other vendors. There's some who are better than others, but we're the ones who bridge that, because we bring that neutrality to the table. And we're big proponents of buying best in class for the environment, as opposed to buying that one product from an ecosystem that's already connected. Mm-hmm. We do that because we believe in the products fitting the environment better.
That's a great point. And that's a great point. And also too, because we're talking about major capital expenditures. Like, these pieces of equipment are significant. You're not just going to easily flip an 8-color perfecting press because it works better with it. You have to almost make it work at a certain point as well.
Stephen, if I can just jump in there too, though, sure. I would almost echo something that Mark said in the previous. I don't think that automation, or at least your first step into automation, needs to be that intimidating or capital intensive. I think Mark had made the comment, if you take capital of your internal resources and your skill sets on your team, and I would venture a guess, and I know it stands true for us, that we do not leverage all of the automation within the systems that we own already, whether they be our MRS or our pre-press. And automation doesn't need to be you go out and hire programmers or you go out and buy robots. It can just be leveraging what you already have. And then once you start that's where Pandora's box, it becomes really, really addictive for the culture of the business to want to do more and be better at it.
Sorry, I don't mean to create a bit of a debate here, but when I looked at starting my business a few years ago, I looked at what was the utilization rates of software. I was a culprit of selling a lot of software to our businesses out there, and lo and behold, when I went back to understand what the person bought and how they're utilizing it, I realized that software at most was being used to about 20 or 30% of the purchase. And again, we're all bashful to admit it, but we have to do something about it. So as Todd suggested, it's about understanding what you currently have and making those adjustments to either get maximum utilization out of it, or connectivity out of it, or even better optimization points.
That's fantastic. I'd like to take this time too to mention to our attendees, please feel free, submit a question and answer if you have for any of the panelists here. It's been a fantastic discussion thus far. I like how it kind of segues into this. Some people may find it overwhelming, right? Automation or even auditing their business. I know that there's been a bit of a pause. Well, obviously a global pandemic would do that, but there was some downtime that allowed companies the time to actually reflect on their internal processes a little more than perhaps normal. What would sort of be a good starting point for someone that sort of still thinks it might be overwhelming, but if they can almost just do one thing, like I like Todd's analogy, start with one thing and it'll become addictive. How would you suggest starting that? Maybe I'll start with Mark, because Mark's smiling like he's got something he wants to share on that point.
Oh, you asked Todd to go first, but I'll jump in and just tell you guys a quick story. We service a customer out of Burlington, Ontario, and they're a large format shop. They came to us a couple of months ago and they said, look, we have this accounting, and I don't want to go into too much detail because we're not here to advertise our business, but essentially they had accounting concerns that was taking an extra few hours every week to do. And they came to us with the problem. We understood it very quickly. And within 3 hours, we came back to them with a solution. They downloaded the workflow and they have relieved themselves of that extra couple of hours every week in their business. And those are quick wins, and those have an impact on the entire business. And as Todd and Byron probably suggest, that's the cultural transformation that gets started. Let's make those quick wins happen, make everybody aware that those are available, and those improvements will allow the staff to also embrace the opportunities around augmenting automation.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I think it is really engaging your team. You've got subject matter experts, throughout your business. And, if you want to, if you engage them and get them excited, they're going to have insights that you're just never going to see. And I think sometimes, we go into whether it's automation or other kind of purchases of equipment where, we as more senior leaders in the company, we have meetings, we try and make good decisions around what capital we should buy. And then we start engaging, our staff along the way, as opposed to beginning with them at the very front end. And I think that automation piece is a great way to start. We have what we call it a continuous improvement team that has just grown and has become very, very large. And we're in the midst of developing right now what we call an automation team, because we think it's so significant within the CI culture of developing and putting more horsepower behind automation, that we actually need a separate group that is really focused on it, because we just believe there's so many opportunities out there. And it begins with the people who are actually doing the job today.
Yeah, I would echo that. I mean, if your team really takes ownership of the outcome, then it's gonna work, and they know where they know where our business needs to improve in efficiency more than certainly I would sitting here. In terms of low-hanging fruit for me, and we have a primary focus right now. We invest tons in automation, but the low-hanging fruit in our business, I believe, falls fundamentally before we even have the initial inquiry of an order. So if we get an initial inquiry, say on a Monday morning, and the job's due on a Friday, I think certainly in our business, and quite typical in the industry, is our customer knows when they need the job, when they initially inquire. And we can blow through days just in back and forths, and then a day with proofing. And that can all be really compressed, a tremendous amount. And just simply by compressing all of that into, say, 3 days into a day, hypothetically, we've all of a sudden given our production team 2 more days to produce it, probably in a more efficient manner rather than a panicked manner. Long story short, I feel like there's a huge upside to streamlining the customer interaction before you even get the job.
That's a great point. Byron or Todd, I'll stay with Todd actually. Have you found that you've been earning more jobs based on the efficiencies that you kind of realized from these processes? Because quicker turnaround times, or as you said, there's more time. So obviously every job you do is going to be the best that you can, but given the amount of time, you really can take your time with something because of the time you saved in the previous steps.
I'm a firm believer in there's a significant portion of jobs you win if you have the first price in. And that's maybe the nature of our business, in that we get requests for quotes from people that already trust us. And they're generally going out to a vendor pool that is trusted already. So, and everything's a rush. So if we can supply a quote that is fair, they determine it to be fair, or for however they do that, and they've got the files ready and they trust us, not quite often, a significant portion of the opportunities come through simply because they trust us and we're first in. And I genuinely believe that service now isn't about the traditional sales rep necessarily going in with the donuts and the coffee and building a relationship that way. People want instant answers and quick communication, and that earns trust within business.
Aaron, do you have anything up to that point? I know
Yeah,
you're a little different in terms of the sometimes larger runs, but you also have some shorter divisions as well too.
Yeah, we do, and in fact, the book market right now has taken a bit of a different turn than certainly some other businesses where, for the last 2 years we've been on a roll, and we are booking out schedules. No matter how much automation, how much efficiency we bring to the system, it's immediately used up, and so we're, typically, unlike Todd, where they're maybe turning jobs in a week. Our typical cycle would kind of be in the 3 to 5 week range for a book. Now you really have to start talking to book manufacturers about maybe summer or fall of 2022, because you'll have a tough time finding people to get work done. And so at the same time, books have increased. Schedules have actually, capacity has decreased, which has made schedules worse, which means that all the efficiencies we're gaining aren't being seen by our customers in the way that we would hope or that they would hope, because what they're actually experiencing is longer lead times now than we've had in decades, despite the fact that we're producing more product than we ever have.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point. Actually, I'll put this question to Mark, just from your side. What percentage of businesses that you've been working with, Mark, have you seen do they have sort of goals? I know Byron had mentioned kind of the automation team, that group that he has. Todd kind of has his core leadership group internally. Do you work with customers that sort of have like a 2-year, 5-year plan in terms of percentage of automating certain processes within their respective businesses?
Very rarely. Very rarely people come to me, because it's mostly smaller businesses that come to me and say, hey, you know what, I have a plan, but I need it immediately. Can you help us resolve our concerns? It's mostly bigger entities, like of Cobra and obviously Friesens, that have a plan, have a team, and then we get engaged with.
Perfect. Todd, I'll ask you, do you have sort of like an automation threshold or percentage you're looking to kind of hit in maybe 2 years out, 5 years out, or is it more of a process based kind of as an overall percentage based?
Yeah, it's a process based, more than a percentage base. We've got a team of 11 programmers and solutions architects here, and 50% of their time would be spent on internal automation. We are constantly seeing improvements or potential improvements throughout our business. It goes on the board and we rank them in terms of biggest upside, which will have the best impact, and they get moved up and down based on that. And I think part of our success has historically been our ability to be nimble and react quickly. And that's how we manage our development team as well.
Aaron?
Yeah, same thing. I think it's more of a process than it is a number that we're looking at. We've certainly identified, in the neighborhood of 5 to 10 areas that we think there's great opportunity for us as a business. But it's under constant evaluation. Even as we evaluate our front end, we certainly want to be as efficient as we can in our front end. But right now, our greater need right now is really, producing more product, because we sometimes are getting files in and they will actually just sit here for a couple months before we'll even look at them, because the schedule is that far out. So it's a bit of a unique time in our history, I'd say, even in the book history right now. But it's very much a process versus a number we're targeting.
Oh, perfect. Like once again, I have a question. Sorry, that came in from. Okay, this question is posed for Mark. It's more of a statement than a question. As you know, utilization of automation tools is to you, as you said, 20 to 30%. My statement is that management really needs to invest employee time into the automation setup. As Mark knows, I use multiple automation tools, but getting time to implement them fully has been my biggest struggle. I'd say the biggest struggle overall. So more of a statement than a question, but if you want to speak to that at all, Mark?
It's a very valid statement. Yes, but it's something where you got to look at what are the expertise and what's the end goal, and certainly come and discuss it with us to see if we can do more for you.
Perfect. I know even Todd had alluded to, yeah, the software that even is currently on hand sometimes isn't totally being utilized. Sometimes it's almost redundant with another process you have already overlapping it. But
Mhm.
yeah, I can definitely see how that could be a factor. Okay. I'd like to kind of have one sort of follow-up panel question as a whole. I'll pose this to you, Mark. Actually, before we get into that, would be, what would you say is the most important area of improvement within our industry in terms of automation processes?
Actually, I'd probably say, without offending anybody, that it's at the educational systems. When we look at what the schools are teaching today, right from the high school levels through to the university levels, those are areas where we can actually start giving the student a chance to get intrigued about our industry, but also intrigued about how to automate in the industry, how to create a future with some innovation in the industry. And to be honest with you, I don't see that the schools are teaching enough of that today. And maybe there's no funding, or maybe there's not enough funding, sort of thing. But certainly when we speak to schools like Ryerson, there's more students going there than ever before. But I think they're learning more on a theory basis. And when we see some students coming out, even on a co-op basis, they're not bringing the value that employers like us or even Todd and Byron could utilize right off the bat. And so I'd probably say that's an area of improvement that I'd love to verbalize for everybody.
I know it's sort of been a long-standing issue within our industry that attracting young, dynamic people into it has sometimes been a challenge. Byron and Todd, have you found that the automation aspect has really given some inroads into getting some more young, technologically based people? I know Todd had mentioned having quite the pool of in-house programmers. Are you finding that more so on shop floor and operators as well too?
For sure. I wouldn't say it's necessarily focused on young though. I mean, and I think it's important to have a portion of this conversation that does speak to the people and the ability to train and change that culture internally to be able to bring somebody in with a good attitude and a good head on their shoulders and teach them a process that we historically probably thought was a sacred craft as a printer, right? And I think that over the last 5 years, I've been humbled by watching people come in off the proverbial street and how fast they can pick up tasks that we had traditionally earmarked as the craft of printing. And I think that that's something that we can do better as an industry, is look at ourselves in the mirror and hire on attitude and work ethic and train from within.
Yeah, I think that when I think of us locally, we often describe ourselves as being centrally isolated. We're about 600 employees in a town of 4,500 people, and we battle for manufacturing jobs, in our southern Manitoba region. And there's also, I think, a perception of manufacturing in general. So, in our industry, maybe as we focus on what we do, there might be stigma attached to it in terms of, noisy and dirty and smelly, and what does it mean to be in manufacturing? And as we get more and more automation and technology into our businesses, we're introducing, as we're trying to do with our schools, for example, locally, to say, listen, manufacturing is a real, legitimate, honorable, job to have. And I think part of what we have to do as a business and as an industry is really start educating, more of the educational systems around what it does look like today. Because I think certainly in some people's minds, what it looks like in their minds is not what it looks like on the floor. My bet would be that other than the people that work here, we've got, a good portion of our community has never been in our building, but they'd all have an opinion of what it looks like. And I think that's a piece that we can certainly do a little better at.
That's a great point, because traditionally I think people seem to think it's, heavy iron, hot lead, all this sort of stuff, foundries and crucibles on the shop floor and all this stuff, when really it's almost more, I like the point too about manufacturing. It's almost a manufacturing process now rather than printing itself, where you're manufacturing both of you guys are manufacturing finished products, whether it be 3D printing, it could be embellished printed pieces. It's a full-on manufacturing process.
Mhm.
Actually, I have a question too about internally, because I'll ask Todd first. Todd, have you found it easier in terms of cross-training people? Because now, kind of going back to the theme of the Great Resignation, that we have less of a workforce. Has it been easier to cross-train people amongst multiple devices because of the automation involved yet? There's less, kind of as you allude to, this craft, this almost the secret process that takes 5 years to learn. Have you found that and realized that more so in your own company?
I think that people are, so specifically on newer equipment as well, people are far more easily cross-trained, and I feel like people want to learn more and embrace learning new challenges. Where we struggle is our commitment to setting aside that time to cross-train, because too often they're a valued operator on a different piece of equipment that also has work. And again, it kind of goes back to that, what are the risks if I don't? And I feel like more than ever, that's something that's impacting, certainly we are not immune to people transferring to a different occupation from Cobra. We focus on retention and recruitment heavily, but we're not immune to the challenges that everybody's going through right now. And I think that the investment we made in cross-training, we're seeing the benefit of it. And frankly, we're also seeing that we didn't do enough of it in years past.
Byron?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think kind of some of this intuitive technology that has come along with new equipment and automation has been a double-edged sword. We've asked for that for the very reason that Todd talked about. We want to be able to cross-train people better. We want to be able to train people up from no knowledge to lots of knowledge very quickly. And in the old days, it was a bit more of a craft, and we have to understand how the machine worked, and we have to listen for the equipment, and different noises told us different things. And we've asked to eliminate a bunch of those things, and they've been able to do that. And with that, we've lost some of that craftsmanship that went along with that knowledge. And yet it's what we asked for, it's what we want, because we believe we can be more efficient. But as an old press operator, I recognize how certainly some of the newer press operators understand how to make the press work and work well. But when something doesn't go well, they're not quite as in tune as our older operators who lived with the machine when it was a more manual process. And so I think that that technology that we've asked for and wanted has certainly been a double-edged sword for us as businesses, but it's still the better long-term strategy than going back to where we were.
Yeah, I would agree there too. Sorry, Stephen, I'm going to.
No, I was actually going to turn over to you, Mark. That's perfect.
Yeah. Well, today what we're seeing from a number of North American customers is that the craft is withdrawn. And really, the new equipment is becoming a lot more intuitive, and yes, that's good. But that's the onset of digital and more automation, and that's a necessity. But really, we, as Todd has said, we can't forget about cross training, and we encourage that with our customer base as well.
Perfect. I'll just have one final question before I'm going to wrap, because we're approaching our time. It's flown. You guys have been fantastic. I'd like to start with Todd and ask. Sort of what you kind of alluded to, how people sometimes have left the industry. What have you done to retain your current staff who've been cross-trained and are kind of top operators within their respective fields?
Yeah, you know what? It's kind of going back to the basics, to be honest with you. Like, it's lead with humility. People come to work wherever they work because they've got to want to come to work, and they've got to enjoy that experience. And I feel like over the last 18 months, this has been hard as hell on people, like regardless of what role you're in, what socioeconomic class you're in. I think that we've all kind of had different challenges throughout this. And I think that has really impacted the workplace in that people can't get beat up at work too. And I think that it's important we talk a lot about automation and investment in technology and new equipment, but it comes down to the people that are behind the scenes running it. And if we don't have those good people, then we've got nothing. So really, really heavy focus internally here of being humble, leading with humility, and going out of our way, this is stating the obvious, of making it a fun place to work. And that's something that we really honestly focus on and we talk about constantly as a management team. We could continue, I mean, we couldn't, we can't chase the wage. Somebody will always pay more for something. I mean, house painters in Kitchener are making $30 an hour. I can't chase that, but what we can do is make this a great place to come every day so that we're not chasing those dollars. Right.
Great point. And the automation helping and easing the workload while they're there too, I think is important. So it's more enjoyable and less physically intensive. It
kind of goes back to making them feel productive, making them feel like they have an impact. And they're not just struggling and grinding their way throughout the day and looking forward to the next break because their work is painful. Yeah,
absolutely. Byron, do you have kind of any initiatives you're using at Friesen? You've alluded to the fact you're kind of in a different situation than Todd, in the sense that you are geographically isolated. So you need to almost retain the people you have rather than them leaving out on that area.
Very much so. And I think one of Todd touched on this earlier, the idea of what's your work culture like. And it's so critical, and especially at this time where, we've mandated internally because of what's going on with COVID. At the time we're trying to see what we can do around the work culture. We're telling people, don't spend too much time together, stay apart. And we believe that that's had an impact, on our culture to some degree, and particularly as senior leaders, where we may be more roaming the business in multiple facilities, that also is going to amp up the risk of actually potentially, harming the business. And so our inability to do some of that, I think, has had some effect on that. But we've really looked kind of at the things that we can control. So things like, work from home, where some of it came out of necessity at the beginning, has now become a bit of a benefit for some of the parts of the business that could actually do that. Something as simple as, casual wear Friday maybe becomes casual wear, every day of the week. Free parking. And we have the wonderful luxury here at Friesen's of being an employee-owned business. So everything that we're doing, goes back to the employees. There's no Friesen family that is reaping the benefits of all these things that we're doing. There's not a corporate head office in New York or Toronto. When people are willing to be cross-trained, when people are willing to try new positions, when the company does well, there's very specific things that are in place that direct it right back to the employee. And so that definitely helps us with our engagement.
Fantastic. Well, I'd like to thank our panelists today. This has been fantastic. I could keep going. This has been great. You've all been very, very candid and collaborative, and it's been a pleasure to moderate this panel. I'd like to thank Todd, Byron, and Mark very much so for their time today. Please feel free, if there's any attendees that would like to pose some questions, we can put them forward to the panel post event. I'll ask Paul to please turn the slide so I can acknowledge and thank our sponsors who we would not be able to host today without. I'd like to thank our platinum sponsors who are Canon, HP, Konica Minolta, Spicers, and Swiss Q Print. I'd also like to thank our gold sponsors, Adobe, Fujifilm, Graphics Canada, Kodak, and Heidelberg, and our silver sponsor, Sydney Stone. And thank the technology was graciously supported by HP for this webinar today. So I'd like to thank that as well. For information on the government funding that was alluded to as well, and to assist in automation, please email Marg McLeod, that's MARG, at digitalimagingassociation.com. We'd be happy to share our resources that we've been able to secure for behalf of the attendees. I'd like to thank all of our attendees today, once again, our panelists. In appreciation of the panel's generous contribution of their valuable time today, we're actually going to make a donation on their behalf to the Don Gain Canadian Print Scholarship Fund. So thank you again. And I'd like to encourage people to be sure to mark their calendar for our next webinar, which will be taking place on Wednesday, December the 8th from 12:30 until 1:30. It'll be a conversation with two industry trade show leaders DScoop as well as Drupa to see their global market and how it's evolving within our industry. I'd like to thank you very much and have a great day, everyone.